Hello and welcome to Discover Energy Work. Today is, well, a kind of special day because a few days ago, Shirley Blanch from the UK, who's running a podcast, and she's going to tell you all about that, contacted me. And within a day, instead of like a lot of people, they contact me and like, oh yes, you can contact me sometime. But like Shirley, dynamic, within a day we were talking. We planned it, I said like a short talk, an hour and a half later, we got off Zoom, and I said like, you've got to come on my show and tell us about your experiences and everything else. And today, so Shirley, it's Shirley Blanch, isn't it?
It is.
Would you like to give your world, the world, your intro?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much, first of all, for having me on. It's always good to come on and sort of share some really positive stuff. So basically, my name's Shirley Blanch, as you said. My business is Get Mindful because I'm a mindfulness coach and meditation teacher, as well as other things. I've studied lots of other things as well. And I host a podcast called The Mindfulness Cafe. And the idea behind it really is to, with my work and with the podcast, is a very simple idea, which is just to help empower people over their own health through sharing people's stories, through sharing my own story and the things that I know, but also by inviting other people on and to share, share and inspire, share and inspire.
So where do you feel, I know we've gone through all this, so I know some of the answers already, but like I'm Discover Energy Work, I'm about like empowering people to say, perhaps in the simplest way, thinking something positive or envisioning something positive. That would be very simple energy work, but there's all kinds of energy work. Where do you feel the energy work or the inspiration to connect with me and Discover Energy Work came from?
I mean, I just feel like you never meet anybody by accident. So that's a basic principle in my life, that anybody that, when I'm in a certain energetic vibration, the people that match that vibration show up. And so I think it's no coincidence that I'm here talking to you now and that this has happened so quickly. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that everything is energy and it works in mysterious ways. And there are many different avenues. And I think for me personally, I studied energy healing and I've studied lots of different aspects of that. But I think when I did the actual energy healing work, what I found was that I just wanted to talk to people. So part of the thing about healing is you really don't want to be talking to people because you want to be focusing around the energy more, and also you don't want to be one of the things that we were taught with healer training, and I don't know if you were taught the same, is that actually you've got to be very careful. If somebody's coming to you for healing, there is such a thing as a nocebo effect as well as the placebo effect. So anything that you say that people could take to sort of really respond to, that you may be picking up on something that they may then worry about, so you just got to be very careful and very quiet when you're working with people in a healing capacity. And I just love talking to people, and so I really felt that even though I'd learned about the healing, that actually maybe my healing was to be done through speaking. Because as you thought you might have a 10-minute chat with me, an hour and a half later you were there. And so I feel like we all have our own unique gifts and ways of sharing healing in the world, and I just feel that maybe mine is through my voice rather than through actually doing the energy work itself.
Yeah, I mean, in our talk before is, I was saying, psychic's the new gay, if we say we feel something energetically, we can even take a energetic transmission from people. It's like, ooh, go away, you're like a weirdo, yeah. And of course that harms us. That's like a nocebo, placebo, nocebo. I think it can definitely harm us, and so we tend to sort of not talk about it. And when we're doing energy work on people, we have to be sure that a lot of people, they can even undo their own energy work because they just think, I've worked on some people's shoulders and they've gone, oh, it's good, and they've gone like, oof, oof, punch their shoulder and then slam it against the wall. And I said, it hurts when I slam it against the wall and punch it. It's like, yeah, but you don't normally do that. Why are you suddenly doing that to yourself?
It's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting. It's almost, I think it's sometimes people almost can't accept, you know, that's just a blockage to acceptance of the healing, isn't it? It's like I've got to undo it in some way, because it doesn't sit completely right with where I am at the moment. But I think the nocebo effect is something I'm very interested in applying healing in all sorts of different ways to people's personal empowerment over their health. Because of the way that I came into this was through losing my father to cancer, and how that journey, and I also lost my mother-in-law to cancer, and one of my closest friends during the time that he was ill as well. And so my reality at that point became very, very focused on disease rather than health. And I became very anxious around that subject. And so I think I'm probably very hypervigilant to things that might affect people on a subconscious level to their healing. And so I think words can be really powerful, and words can harm or they can heal. And so so I'm just very conscious of that.
It's do you mind if I ask you a little bit about that, because we did talk about it? So you were saying your father had cancer, and then that led you to be interested in this area. So what was the experience there?
Yeah, back in 2006, my dad got diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He had a 5-year journey with that. And there were periods of remission. But I think that the thing that a lot of people, unless you've been through that journey yourself, what you don't realize is that it's not just the diagnosis, it's the constant tests, it's the constant treatments, it's the constant appointments. So you're living in a heightened state of stress for a lot of the time, regardless of whether it's you going through it or your family around you. Everybody's waiting for the next test, the next scan result, the next prognosis. So you're constantly living in this state. And during that 5-year period, my mother-in-law got diagnosed with cancer as well, a kind of unusual form of cancer of the womb, and she had a lot of treatment, and unfortunately she passed away. And also one of my closest friends who'd been battling breast cancer, who was somebody that I'd known since I was a teenager, she also passed away. So there were 3 people in my life that kind of passed away in a relatively short space of time. So my reality became at that point, when everybody just gets cancer and dies, like who's next? Because I'd seen that shown to me so many times, because I'd had this experience, and that's not rational thinking, because of course I could have looked around and seen other people that I knew during that time who'd had cancer and not died. But we become very irrational when we're running on fear and when we're running on stress. And because I think I was a stay-at-home mum at the time, and I had a lot of time on my hands to think about stuff. I had 2 small children. That gave me a lot of time to focus on this thing. And then I noticed that it started really affecting my behavior and my well-being, to the point where I was going to the doctors quite a lot because I was worried that I was getting cancer all the time. I was becoming hypervigilant. Any article that I would see about cancer, I was consuming. It was like you can become very tunnel vision over one thing. So I think that it had become to the point where I was almost talking myself into getting ill, or to somebody around me getting ill. It almost seemed like an inevitability to me, because this is what I'd seen. And I think also because my husband had gone through that experience with one of his parents during this time as well, that a lot of our conversations were around, it wasn't like there was just one of us going through it and then the other one would say, but come on, we were both going through this period of grief. And so that exacerbated, I think, the focus on this particular subject. And it really wasn't until somebody said to me one day, have you ever considered that you might not get cancer? That I suddenly realized how irrational my thinking had got and how catastrophic my thinking had got, because it took for somebody to say that to me, for me to realize that I hadn't actually considered that could be an option.
You were also telling me that something your father went through with a healer particularly impressed you.
Yeah, definitely. So what it did was, there were some things that I was left with afterwards that made me ask some questions about things. So, you know, I would never say to anybody, don't go down the traditional medical route, because, you know, everybody has to go through whatever treatment they feel is right for them. And I think you have to be very positive about the treatment that you're having, whatever that treatment looks like. But the reality for me at that time, and the reality for the people that I knew that were going through this at that time, was we'd invested all our faith in the medical profession, and then when they turn around and say that they can't help you anymore, then you're left in a really scary place, because it's like, well, what do we do now? You know, you told us that this would work, and now it's not worked, and now what do we do? And I think this is where people then start to look for other things. And certainly, you know, come from a very traditional family of, my dad was open actually to trying different things, and he'd had acupuncture and maybe some other stuff, so it wasn't like he was completely closed off to that. But in the mainstream, we'd get ill, we'd go to a doctor, you know, so there was no kind of energy healing or anything like that. But being in that situation, we went to somebody who'd been recommended as a healer. And at that point, my dad was in a lot of pain. He was on enough fentanyl to knock out a rhino, but he was still in a lot of pain, you know, so that was the strongest stuff that they could give him. And so out of desperation, he went to the healer. And of course, what we were hoping was that she would heal him, and and the cancer would go away and he'd get better. The reality of it was, though, that actually she would get him out of pain. So whatever she was doing, however she was working with him, he would come home from seeing her and he would just sleep, and he would be out of pain. And actually, at that point, that was such a gift for us, because to see my dad out of pain was just a joyful thing.
Right, because I mean,
it was very interesting.
He's not going to, we haven't got any drugs, we haven't got any more drugs that we can give him. He's in pain.
Yeah.
There's nothing else we can do for the pain even. And you go and see somebody without any medication, just like energy or spiritual or some kind of healer, and then he's without pain. Amazing. Yeah,
which was, you know, and I think this is where people kind of don't always understand healing. You know, healing isn't necessarily about curing, it's about helping whatever you need the help with at that point, you know. And I think sometimes people kind of get confused with what that is, and so healing can look like a number of different things. And for him at that time, I think also the other thing that she was amazing for with him was she was somebody that he could talk about his acceptance of his death, you know. And at that time he had certainly, you know, he didn't have very long left, and none of us wanted to talk about, none of us wanted to accept that at that point. Right. So he couldn't really talk to any of us, but I know from having spoken to her afterwards that he was able to speak to her. So I think it wasn't just the healing that she was doing for him. I think it was almost like a form of counseling and helping him with that transition at that period in his life.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, don't you think it changes when we experience something we can't explain, and somebody's saying, well, I'm working on an energetic level, because you are actually more energetic than you are physical, if you like, because once the physical body is gone, there's still the energy. So that can definitely open your mind. I can imagine for a lot of people.
It was very interesting that, and the other thing that I think that she said to him, which he spoke to me about, because he knew that I was very aligned with this sort of idea of things. I've always been very open-minded to things. So I would say that although I'm a natural skeptic, because I would question everything on all sides, you know, like, and I think that's a good way to be. And so he would have conversations with it, and he said one of the best things that, or one of the things that he found, actually he didn't say it was one of the best things, one of the things he found really confusing at that time was that she had told him not to fight the cancer. And I think that, and she had told him, because if you're fighting it, who are you fighting? You're fighting yourself. And she would say, we're healing, we're not fighting, we're healing. And so my dad was he sort of set up a boxing club in where we live for young people and stuff like that. He'd always been interested in boxing. So for him, right from the start of this process of having the cancer, it was always like, I'm going to beat this. I'm going to fight it and I'm going to beat it. And this is the narrative that I think we see a lot, especially in mainstream media campaigns around health, around especially things like cancer. Come on, we're going to fight this thing, we're going to take it on. But then let's start thinking about what that actually means. When we're in a fight or flight mode, what mode are we in? We're in a stress response, which isn't the best response to be in for your immune system and for healing. And so she was encouraging him also to see things differently from that perspective. And I think that was very, very interesting. And certainly that was one of the things that stayed with me. And also at that time as well, I was sort of skeptical enough to think, well, this isn't some magical, mystical woo-woo type of thing. But there's obviously something that he's responding to with whatever she's doing, that his own pain-killing mechanisms are kicking in, and that he is then able to go and rest and heal and sleep, so it just it left me with a lot of curiosity around that. And I think when I started on my own journey, it was initially driven very much by fear, because I wanted to empower myself, because I didn't want to be in that situation myself or see somebody else go through it without feeling like I had something that I could do. But you know what, I think a lot of journeys start from a place of fear, because it makes us do something and it makes us make a change.
Right. Well, there's a lot to that. I was talking. I think we were talking about this. What do they call it? Oscillation or pendulum motivation, where when you've got a problem, you're prepared to do. When you've got a health problem, you're prepared to do something about your health. If you're healthy, you're going to be eating chips and watching TV. And until you've got a problem, you don't do anything. And that's when you're swinging left and right and so on. And so. I suppose what the healer's saying, maybe don't fight the cancer, because you're not addressing the bigger issue, which is like supporting your health, building yourself up, loving yourself. Like that's like the Chinese medicinists. They don't even fight disease. They strengthen the core, and the core does everything. The natural intelligence of the body knows how to solve these things. Yeah.
I always sort of say to people, now I think of it like, if you're saying, well, I'm fighting something, well, cancer isn't like somebody that's turned up at your door with a baseball bat. Do you know what I mean? It's something that's happening internally inside of you. And I just think of it as maybe a teenager that's gone astray, that you love and you want to bring back into the fold. It's about creating love, isn't it? So it's about self-love. And how are you loving yourself if you're trying to fight yourself at the same time? It just doesn't work from an energetic perspective.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. But let me try and get a segue from here to mindfulness, because mindfulness is sort of been almost, you could say, I'm not sure, so correct me, is sort of taking the woo-woo out of meditation or anything, spiritual out of these things, and saying, okay, well, there's this core, which we could say, it doesn't matter what background you've got or what religion you've got, you could do these practices and you're going to find some benefit, because the body and the mind really respond to these. And then, so you didn't go and you didn't join, a energy work group. You were attracted to mindfulness, which is this more pragmatic approach. Is that right?
Well, actually, no. What happened to start with was, as I started to go on this journey, I actually went and joined a group of healers and learned to meditate with a group of healers. So I actually I went on a weird route to mindfulness. So I started doing all the more woo-woo stuff. I started with a group of energy healers. I actually trained as a healer myself before I even found the mindfulness. So I then stumbled across a form of meditation called transformation meditation, which sort of combines mindfulness with transcendental meditation, which I found that quite interesting. I did a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy course because I loved the idea of combining CBT with mindfulness, because I'm a real let's change stuff person. And this is the thing that I would say to anybody: if you're looking to work with somebody on your own healing journey, then find the right person for you, because because I'm not the right person for everybody. Yeah, and I would say that up front, because I'm a real, let's change something, let's do something. I have that energy about me, and not everybody wants to do that, you know. So it's about finding the right. So I was going very much down the route of let's change some stuff, let's do, what can we do, what can we do? So I did the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy because I thought that was really interesting. I then, my children at that time, one of my sons was going through some issues at school. He was having a bit of bullying, like lots of kids do. And I saw a course for teachers to be able to teach mindfulness to children. And I thought, well, this could be really cool, because actually what I can do then is empower myself as a parent to have some really good tools to help my son and to help my own kids go through some stuff and have some tools to empower them. And so I sort of, even though it was a course for school teachers, I sort of blagged my way into this course to learn how to teach mindfulness to children. Then realized that I'd made mindfulness the least cool thing in the world to my own kids, because if their mum's doing it, they're probably never going to want to do it themselves. But what I would say is, although they have never really done the meditation and mindfulness, what they see is they see me doing it, and that acts as an example to them, and they find their own forms of meditation, and they find their own ways of dealing with things, because I'm modeling to them the behavior. So I did that, and then I learned how to teach mindfulness to people in the workplace, because that was a kind of add-on to that course, so that you could go in and teach it to teachers if you wanted to. And then I thought, well, you know, if I'm not doing this with my own kids, then maybe I could help some other people's kids. So I started just going into schools and see if schools wanted to do some mindfulness. And I remember the first day I went in and stood in front of a class of 36 kids, and they said, okay, you've got 2 hours and these kids are yours now. And I'd never taught anything to children ever. And I did that, and they all loved it. And it was just really rewarding. And so I kind of have meandered into doing the mindfulness from that perspective, and it wasn't really anything that I'd ever considered doing. I'd never considered doing any of this as a job, to be honest, but I've been so motivated to try and help other people learn what I've learned along the way, that this is why I do what I do now. Right.
So you're going into schools and teaching the children to cool it, yeah, to able to find some space inside where they weren't really aware of before. Is that right?
So yeah, so the great thing is that I think, because the mindfulness thing, like you said, has been taken, you know, there are some arguments like, can it be proper mindfulness if you are taking the spiritual element away from it, because the spiritual element itself is so powerful and healing. But definitely mindfulness has been, in, you know, certainly in the UK, and I think in other countries as well, has been brought into this kind of secular place, into a more clinical setting, because of the work John Kabat-Zinn has done, and putting in place these mindfulness-based stress reduction courses, and then other people have evolved it from there. And there are certainly, in the UK, there are certainly very specialized courses where people go into schools and sort of teach it. The one that I did actually combined emotional resilience with mindfulness, which I think it's really, really important, because again, I think that some people just see mindfulness as a panacea, and that, like, this is all we need. But I would say to people, mindfulness is just a tool, like a number of tools that you have that you can use in your tool set as a practice. So the course that I did was very much about where you teach kids how their brains are working. You teach them an analogy about different parts of the brain, what's actually going on there, and then you incorporate some sort of breathing stuff. So trying to make it fun, trying to make it interesting, getting them to speak positively about themselves. So not everything that you would consider to be mindfulness was sort of integrated into this practice. So I sort of started doing that, and I've done a fair amount of work in schools and teaching to teachers as well. It sort of then evolved to teaching to teachers, and then moving on to really sort of working with adults and running groups within the community to help people with their own well-being. Because what I realized is that, you know, you can go into schools and you can run these little things, and it's a sort of tick box exercise, but then if they're still sitting in a class with a teacher who's stressed out, or they're going home to parents to a stressed out environment there, what you're doing is kind of quite ineffective. Essentially, you've given them maybe one or two things they can do for themselves, but the reality, I think, of making anything like this work is to integrate it into the culture. So, you know, and the problem is that you can kind of go into schools, and some are very willing to do that, and then others, it's just a tick box exercise, and you've been in and you'll say your bit and you'll go away again. So I like the idea of integrating it into teachers' practice so that they're modeling it, and also to teach it to parents as well so that they're modeling it. So what you're doing is you're creating this culture of just, you know, really good, positive self-development, you know, and the stuff that I wish that I'd known, you know, just good emotional literacy, good communication.
Now let me just pause you for a second, because I know what it means, but I'm not sure everybody knows what emotional resilience means or emotional literacy means. And would you like to explain what that means to people?
Yeah, certainly. And I give it from my definition of just from, you know, what I've learned. Yeah. I'm a real empath, and I'm sort of like quite a sensitive person. And I say something like emotional resilience was always really difficult for me growing up, because anything that anybody would take, I would take to heart. I would blame myself for everything. I'd always take responsibility for everything. So I found, you know, criticism quite difficult to deal with. I wouldn't have a growth mindset. I'd have a real fear of failure. I'd have real, you know, perfectionism around everything. And I think a lot of the stuff that's come out, you know, sort of from the psychology world of like growth mindset. So like, just because you can't do it doesn't mean that it just means you can't do it yet. So, you know, things like that. So losing your fear of failure, being prepared to be yourself, you know, talking about yourself in a positive way, just really little things like that. And we might think, well, that we don't talk about ourselves negatively, but we do in our heads all the time. You know, like everybody that I've met always talks about themselves. So I do this exercise at the beginning of workshops and things, and I just say, just tell me something great about you. Just pick 5 of your strengths and just tell me about them. And people always apologize for it. You know, they're like, oh, this feels really awkward, but I think I'm quite good at. You know, because I think culturally, certainly in the UK, we've got very much a culture of, well, if I talk about myself positively, then people are going to look at me and think, wow, she really loves herself. And think of that in that language. We're told that it's really important for us to love ourselves. But if someone starts saying, hey, I'm really great at whatever, we're like, hey, she really loves herself. She's an awful person, you know. So we have this really interesting relationship with positive self-talk. So emotional resilience is really kind of working on yourself, seeing yourself in a really positive way, so that you can, it doesn't really then matter what people say outside of you, because you're only going to respond if you believe it yourself, you know. So it's being kind to yourself, and being able to sort of, people say bounce back, but I'd like to say bounce forward, because you notice what triggers you, you look and see what's going on internally and why that's happening, and then you've got some really good tools to help you navigate that emotionally, so that you can use it as a way of developing and just kind of getting better at what you do. So I would, that for me, that's what emotional resilience is. And emotional literacy is really teaching children and teaching ourselves to communicate our feelings, and really talking about our feelings, so that we're developing good language around our emotions, so that we're able to put our emotions into words. Because I think sometimes some of the problems that we have is that we can't always express ourselves. And when we can't express ourselves, it's very frustrating. And with my children, I had one of my sons had delayed speech because he had a slight problem with his hearing. And so I've seen firsthand how frustrating it is when people won't let you speak. So people would try and finish his sentences for him because he had problems with recollecting the right word, finding the right word in time. So he would, maybe stop and say a lot, and then somebody would finish it for him or try and do something like that. My other son had a problem with his comprehension for a time when he was growing up. And so he would be able to use really brilliant words, and he's a great speaker, and he's very extrovert, but he wouldn't understand the words that he was using, and he would use them out of context. So people thought he was understanding, but he couldn't follow simple instructions. And so I suppose through that journey as well, I've understood the importance of communication and the importance of emotional literacy that you can teach to young people.
Yeah, amazing. And have you had any feedback from kids or teachers that said wow, stories where surprise somebody's like really made amazing breakthroughs?
Well, I used to do I used to do these sort of drop-ins. My favorite thing to do is I used to do drop-ins at a school, at my son's secondary school, actually. So it was with older children, and they would come in and they would see me on a one-to-one basis and just chat about stuff. And quite often they just wanted to chat about stuff, It was nice for them at school, I think, just to see somebody that they could just be themselves with and communicate with. And one of the biggest things they would say is nobody listens to me, and I think that that's really important. And quite often you will find that your kids will say, you're not listening to me, and we just don't really listen to what that means, because actually sometimes they just want to be heard. You don't need to agree with them, but they just want to feel like they've been heard. And I would certainly get feedback from them saying, oh, that thing that you told me really helped me. One girl that I was working with that had panic attacks, and I just gave her a very simple breathing exercise to do if she was panicking somewhere. Because what I like to do is, so just to sort of probably be a bit more clear about, the way that I approach the mindfulness stuff really is I like to give people real-time things that they can incorporate into their everyday lives so that they can access them, because that's what I've done for myself. So when I started learning all this stuff, I did the meditation and all that kind of stuff, but I started to hack it a bit so that it would fit in with my life, so that I do things in the way that I would do them, that maybe other people won't do it. And so I feel very much like, there'll be people out there who are much more qualified in mindfulness or, or other things like that. But the thing that I do that is different is I've just taken mindfulness principles and I've made them work with my everyday life. So I will see somebody and they'll say, oh, look, there was this one girl, and she used to have panic attacks in public spaces. So there'd be, she can't sit down at that point and do a mindfulness exercise, but she can do a simple breathing exercise. And so what I would do is I'd say, just like get your finger and just draw around your hand and breathing in and out as you draw around your hand, because when you're doing that, your focus and your attention is taken totally away from your body, where you might be really struggling with the breath. So if you're focusing on breath work and you're focusing on your chest area and you're feeling really panicky, that's not necessarily the right place to be focusing on at that time. But by just taking her attention away, and she would just draw around her hand like that. And she would just do one breath in, one breath out, one breath in, one breath out. And just using her hand to draw around her other hand, using one finger to draw around the other hand, that took her attention away from the area of her body where she was struggling to another area, and stopped her thinking the thoughts that were making her panic. And so for her, that was really good. One of the things that I would do is if kids were coming in and they were really stressing about exams and stuff, I'd be telling them about the different parts of their brain and why, when we're in a stress response, you can't remember things and you can't process things properly. And so that was really helpful to them. But do you know what I used to just say? One of the most simple things that people said had the biggest impact on them, and this was whether it was parents or kids, I would just say, okay, so we're always worried about things that have happened in the past or things that might happen in the future. So if you think about the stuff that wakes you up in the middle of the night, it's always like you're playing over something that may have happened during the day, and you can't change that, or something that may have happened a really long time ago, because sometimes people never get over that stuff either. Or we're trying to predict the worst possible outcome for ourselves in the future, because we somehow think that if we can predict the worst possible outcome, it won't happen, or it will feel better when it does happen. And the truth is that if that thing did happen, it's not going to make you feel any better, the fact that you've been worrying about it for so long. So I would say to them, in this moment, right here, right now, where all you've got to do is focus on sitting on a chair, listening to me speak, and just bring yourself right into this present moment. What worries do you have? And then they would go, oh, but I'm still worried about my exams. I'm still worried about, this issue at home. I would go, no, right here, right now. Just, it's sitting on that seat. All you've got to do is you're sitting on a seat in a room with me, listening to my voice. In this moment, what worries do you have? And then that would make them go, oh, right in this moment, when that's all I've got to do, I have no worries. And I'm like, well, you can bring yourself into that moment at any time that you want.
Yeah.
And it's almost giving people permission to not worry. And I think that's interesting, because they're told all the time, you've got to be worried about your exams. You've got to get your exams. You've got to be worried about, you've got to be thinking, focus on this, focus on this, focus on this. But actually, they're never given permission to not worry. No one ever says, you don't have to worry. It's actually worrying's
Yeah,
optional.
it's interesting because from an energy work point of view, worrying is casting a curse or a spell on your own future. Yeah, because you're not sending good energy to it. You're just like sending, yeah, like what's the worst that could happen? Like, don't even ask that question.
Yeah,
actually, you should be strong to
you're
it. That's the
creating
point. Yeah, you should be strong to it. I mean, that's my. It's like you need to be strong to all possible outcomes because we just don't know. It's like the current situation in the government, like or in any country in the world. Nobody knows which way it's going to go. Probably spending all my time thinking about what's the worst thing that can happen. There is somebody that actually that's their job, yeah. So they're preparing for it. But internally, we need to be strong for everything. That's that neutral we were talking about, that neutral mindset. You know, it really does help with that neutral mindset when you come into now, for sure, or come into the present moment.
Definitely. And then the other aspect of mindfulness, which is the non-judgmental aspect, I think is really important. And that comes into play because, like you were saying, if we start judging things as good or bad, then we'll have an emotional response to that. And then we start creating more of that. And whatever we focus on becomes the biggest thing. Because look at, you know, my focus on illness and disease, you know, like I know how these things can take over your life. So when things happen by sort of going, well, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know yet, you know, like I'm not going to judge it because I don't know how it's going to end up. Because actually I could probably look back over some of the things that I thought were the worst things that happened to me and go, actually, do you know, if that had never happened, then this would never have happened and I wouldn't be here now. And so we don't always know. So just not taking away that judgment aspect, I think helps. And I always like the Abraham Hicks thing of things are always working out for me, you know, like that little affirmation, you know. So if something happens in my day that wasn't what I wanted to happen or wasn't what I think, I just say things are always working out for me, because in a way that just makes me feel more optimistic that I might not understand it now, but this could actually be a good thing.
Yes, that's there's a lot of wisdom in I would say it's almost not positive thinking. It's just believing that, oh, I might not. Well, okay, from a Christian point of view, you'd say like, you know, I think Jesus says like God's taking care of every single bird. Don't you think He's going to take care of you? And from a Buddhist point of view, it's that's so funny. It was in my mind. What's the Buddhist? And I thought, well, I'll explain the Christian first. Yeah, no, I can't. I've totally forgotten the Christian, the Buddhist explanation. But yeah, I think being strong, being on the middle way, that we're not judging the past or the future or whether something that happened is good or bad for us. It's just a thing. The mind labels things, doesn't it? So it just labels things in good and bad. But you'll find somebody finds something that you find bad good. There's a great story in Germany. There was a guy that he was a butcher, and he discovered he met a Chinese person, and he discovered all of the chicken feet were being chopped off and thrown in the mesher, yeah, in Germany. So whenever, you know, people were, you know, preparing kitchens to be sold at supermarkets, they'd chop like very high up, they'd chop, you know, the joint, and there'd be no chicken feet. When he heard that, he said, right, I understand that the Chinese and the Thais and the Asians, they love chicken feet. It's a delicacy, yeah, and they would literally just buy bags of chicken feet. And he made an absolute fortune. And it's just, you know, well, our judgment doesn't really see the whole picture. That's it. Buddha's first instruction on why we suffer is lack of understanding about the true nature of reality. That's what I was going to say. There you go. I come back.
I love that. It was worth waiting for, Richard.
Yes, yes.
It was worth waiting for
I
that
kind
to
of,
come back.
fumbled and fudged for a few minutes, telling you like things. I thought, well, it'll come when it's supposed to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is really important. And also I think as well, because sometimes you can talk to people and people say time heals, and it does to a degree, but you can also talk to people. And I've had people in my wellbeing groups who will talk about something that's happened maybe 20 years ago, and they will still cry when they talk about it, because actually they haven't addressed it and it is very suppressed. And so it's still very painful and very difficult. So I would say as well, it's really important to get to this place of acceptance, and the reason that I can talk about the losses that I've had in my life and all that kind of stuff is because I have gone and worked through them and done the work on it as well. So I think it's an important aspect of that.
It is, and I like the expression. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but it's I think Milton Erickson said it. If it wasn't Milton Erickson, it was Richard Bandler. He said it's never too late to have a happy childhood. Yeah, because we need to also go back and heal these things. Yeah, it's like in now we can go back into the past and clear it up and turn it into something. Instead of crap, we turn it into fertilizer. And that's the interesting thing about energy work. You're working in past, present, future. I remember working with somebody, and I was working with her about an allergy, and it turned out it was everything to do with the allergy was about something she was worried about in the future. And
Wow.
Clearing all that, the allergy cleared. Like, who'd have guessed? Yeah. But that's kind of, energy work's kind of a tool like that.
Well, I think when you start looking at people's subconscious programming, and you start to look at your own, certainly going back and some of the things that you believed were true, and how that's affected your belief system, but also where you place your focus. And where you place your focus it determines where your emotional response is going to be, and that determines how much energy you have, because of the link between our emotions and the energy states that we have. I think it's really important.
Well, there's that. I mean, there's the whole morphic fields idea, where it's like once there's a sort of enough people that believe a certain thing, then that thing starts to become almost energetically real, and it can affect us whether we believe it or not. Yeah. So it might be something we don't believe, but still, that the energy of it can affect us.
Yeah.
I think that's something that Rupert Sheldrake talks about.
Yeah, morphic resonance, isn't it? And it, where animals will start behaving in a particular way, and then their counterparts in other countries will start behaving in a particular way, because they're almost picking up. I think it was that he noticed it with I think there were the stories of blue tits or something, when they started drinking the cream off of the milk in where they started pecking through the top of milk bottles and drinking the cream off of the top of milk, and then their counterparts in the States started doing it at exactly the same time. And he's talked about things to do with rats, and rats understanding suddenly, rats in one place will come across a poison or something that's going to kill them, and they'll recognize it, and so they won't go to it. And then rats in other areas would do the same without it, and it's like they can connect on an energetic level without being in the same country or the same continent. It's a fascinating subject, and he's a great. I've seen him speak.
The advantage that rats and blue tits have is they don't have to have things proved by science first before they believe them.
Well, I think that certainly he makes some great points, doesn't he, that science has almost become the religion of our time, and that in the same way that people used to look at priests and think that they had all the answers, and they would have to look to priests to tell them what to do. I think we definitely have that at the moment with science and scientists, and I think the idea of being truly skeptical is just to be open-minded, and also what's very interesting, I think, is that the people like him are sort of looking to use science to explain the human experience, not denying the human experience because it doesn't fit in with the science, What they're looking at saying is, you know, lots of people are having this experience, or they're having psychic experience. What could that be? And let's try and find something to sort of back that up. Whereas you will get other people who are very attached to an ideology who will say, well, that can't possibly be, so you didn't experience that, and sort of almost denying people's experiences that they have had.
Yeah, that was an interesting story. Raymond Moody, I don't know if you know the story of Raymond Moody. Yeah. So Raymond was a philosophy professor that then became a psychiatrist. So he did the whole medicine degree and then specialized in psychiatry. And he changed the diagnostic criteria manual from, if people had a near-death experience and would be out of their body and everything else, then psychiatrists would think that was definitely abnormal, and now we consider it a normal phenomena. So the near-death experience is, you won't get put into a mental asylum if you have a near-death experience. We have so much documentation about these experiences, and we know it's a natural thing. And that guy is an amazing. He's a skeptic. If you ever watch him talk on videos, he's just like very cool. I wanted to ask you, you're running a podcast as well. I'd like to, let you explain a little bit about that to all the listeners, all 5 of them, or 5 million.
Yeah. Yeah, let's create that reality right now, Richard. Let's go for that. Definitely. So I co-host, I should say. I'm sort of hosting it mainly at the moment because in the UK at the moment we're in lockdown. So just we can't sort of hang out. So myself and Paul Rumsey, who is a guy I met, who again we met by chance, but I just think that people don't come into your life by chance. We met and at the gym, and if you ever speak to Paul, he'll say it's very rare for him to have been at the gym. So that in itself was like a a sort of real coincidence. And we started chatting, and I don't even know, but I will go and talk to people randomly about. And we discovered that we had a lot in common, and we discovered that he'd sort of studied years ago. He has an honorary doctorate in philosophy, and he studied metaphysics, and his aunt was involved very much in this sort of community that she developed in America. He's a sort of American born, but he lives in the UK, and he'd been a DJ out in LA back in the 80s and 90s before he pursued more of an IT career, and he kind of went down a corporate route. And then he went through this experience where he got this very good job, this very good sort of high-flying corporate job, and then got made redundant in his 50s, which was a really, really hard thing for him to go through, and that like impacted him massively. And so I think he'd been through his own challenges with his own mental and emotional health, and is on a path back up, and he's kind of pulled himself back up. But what he realized was that he'd let a lot of this stuff go that he really believed in back in, sort of 20 years ago. And so when we started talking, he was like, God, I've forgotten all this stuff. And I think actually this is the stuff I need that's going to really help me now. And also this is the stuff that I really believe in. And it sort of ignited a spark in him as well. So we just got chatting, and we said, well, why don't we just record some stuff and see what happens? And so that's what happened, really. And he had been running a sort of a radio thing, which he'd kind of let go, because again, he didn't have the energy for it, he didn't have the enthusiasm for it. So we sort of took over that platform, rebranded it Mindfulness Cafe. And so we started off really just recording big topics and ideas, very much like, you would cover, just on big things like, well, what is maybe healing? What is we talked about my story, but we also would talk about forgiveness, like the nature of forgiveness, gratitude, just some of those just sort of big well-being ideas. And then we got other people involved, sort of nutritionists, mindset coaches, and we got them on to share. So really the whole idea behind it is just for people just to sort of spread a bit of light out into the world. Like you can go online and you can see all this negative, you want to consume negative content, like there's a lot you can consume. So our idea was just to put out an antidote to that, and also just to let people find the right things for them. So we've talked to all sorts of really interesting people and got all sorts of people's stories and found out what it was for them, because everybody's different and everybody will find different things that works for them. So there's no point in just saying, well, you know, just do mindfulness because that's going to be the thing for you, because it might not be the thing for you. But you might listen to somebody else's story and find out what they've done. You know, my best friend's a nutritionist, and she comes on and she'll talk about the power of healing that she's found through nutrition and through food. Like, food is her religion, if you like, you know, and nutrition is her spiritual place and her home. And so I think it's very important to to put some stuff out there that people can respond to, and just to kind of counteract some of the other stuff that's being put out.
And it's called Mindfulness Cafe.
Yes, so it's the Mindfulness Cafe. So the idea is that people just drop in, tell their story virtually, virtually drop in, have a cup of green tea or whatever, tell their story and pop off again. You know, we just like that idea that it was like a drop-in thing and nothing's off limits. Like, it doesn't have to be about mindfulness. It can be about anything, but it's just about how people have empowered themselves. I think the main message about it is empowerment. And it's about recognizing that we're more powerful than we think. Yes. And that we can do things for ourselves, because I think we're taught a lot of we're sent a lot of disempowering messages, like your health isn't in your hands, it's in somebody else's hands, or right. So that was the idea.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, for me, it was starting the podcast was similar in the way I just wanted to give people a community. Because like, you have an energy work experience or an energy experience, and you've got, who do you talk to about that without potentially damaging yourself? Yeah. Whatever it is, I remember being in the X-ray department, seeing X-rays and saying, I just saw X-rays. And they said, no, you didn't. And I was like, actually, I did. I saw something. I didn't know what it was. I'm not saying I now see X-rays, but I had an experience, and people just shut you down straight away. And having a place where you didn't feel like you were being shut down, somebody was listening to you or sharing a similar experience. Say, yeah, that's normal. And by the way, you're going to get shut down by a lot of people. So just be, find your I don't know what you say, find your clan.
Yeah, find your tribe, and you never know who they might look like, and you never know who they might be. And we've had to kind of just go, look, we're just open to sharing anybody's experience as long as they have the right energy to them. And Rich, you and I have discussed this. It's like you sort of you pick up on it, and it's about people that have the same intention, that people have the same intention, that they just want to go out and help other people and inspire other people as well. And, we've done a podcast, the one that's out this week, actually, which was one again where we were like, do we want to go into this subject or not? And we've got a witch on, and she's talking about witchcraft, and there are a lot of myths around that. But actually you start speaking to her and you hear her story, and she started off as a Christian missionary, and ended up becoming a pagan witch, and you find out why. And it's because she'd gone through this whole experience through that church, and she'd been abused, and she'd had to overcome a lot, and she ended up being suicidal, and she ended up with a lot of health problems. She couldn't get out of bed, and she found her own path. And what was so empowering about speaking to her, and actually somebody messaged me today and said that they actually brought them to tears hearing her story, because actually she said now I am so accepting of who I am that I can sit on a podcast and I can say I'm a witch. And she said, and I know people will judge me for that, and I know some people will hate me for that, and I know that all this. And she said, but I'm so at peace with who I am now that I can say that. And I think that's powerful. That's incredible. And so that's what we try and do, is just have a platform where we're not advocating anything. We're just allowing people a safe space to talk about their experience and their journey.
Thank you for coming on the Discover Energy Work podcast. I'm Richard Wiggs. This is Shirley Blanch. It's been wonderful. We'll have to do it again.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me.